you bet. Cool. So we'll go ahead and kick this thing off. Welcome back to another episode. I'm here in Zoom land with Chris Hansen, Colorado State Senator of District 31. Mr. Hansen serves on the Colorado Senate representing the East Central and Southeast neighborhoods of Denver of District 31. He specializes in energy sector economics and data analytics with more than 20 years of experience in the global energy industry. Chris, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Justin. Great to see you.
Yeah, no, it is. And for the audience, I actually was introduced to Chris during my time at the University of Colorado doing the global energy management program. And, Chris is a professor for a couple of the elective courses, the travel courses, which, kind of funny enough, during COVID, we weren't able to do the travel for the travel courses, but I still got a lot of, there was a lot of great takeaway from the courses that I did take. But Chris, is that still something that's on your radar? Are you still doing the travel courses? Kind of brief me on that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, a really fun part of my work outside the legislature is to teach a couple of the classes for the GEM program, and they got put on hold, as you said, or changed because of COVID. But yeah, we're planning to bring those back in 2023, and looking forward to getting back on the road with all the great students at GEM.
Yeah, no, it's I think part of the timing that I chose to go back to school worked out very well. But for the small, missing out on the cohort weekends, being together, and then obviously the travel courses, it was kind of a bummer. But for anyone out there listening that's ever considered going back to school to get your graduate degree, I have nothing but great things to say about the program. Chris, amongst all the other professors, are just absolutely amazing. And now that the world's opened up for the most part, you get to experience a lot of the face-to-face and even travel. So, Chris, I'm curious, how long have you been, teaching at the University of Colorado? Because I mean, it's been a while, right? You've done it for a bit.
Yeah. I've been involved with the GEM program in different ways for about 10 years, either guest lecturing or teaching classes. And yeah, it's been a really, really fun part of my professional life to get to spend time with the GEM students. The London course that we do to learn about global energy markets, and then I do the DC course to talk about U.S. energy policy, and talk to professionals in both of those great cities. I've been doing that for about 5 years total, with of course the COVID interruption layered on top of that.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, no, that's awesome, and to be able to give back and help students like myself, it's that work is amazing, and a big shout out to the entire GEM program. So now that we're recording this now, it's basically October. How's the beginning of fall treating you? I mean, is aside from work and everything else, is everything going pretty good up there in Colorado?
Yeah, of course there's this little thing called an election coming up here
Yeah,
in a few weeks.
yeah.
Ballots drop in Colorado in about 20 days. So
Okay.
we have mail-in ballots and a 3-week voting period in Colorado. So that is just around the corner. And so I've been doing a lot of work to help my colleagues in the Senate. I am not on the ballot this year, so
Okay.
I'm helping other colleagues, other candidates who are running for state Senate, and that's been really fun work. But the other thing that I do in the fall is that I take all of my research from the summer and start to draft legislation for introduction in January. So Colorado State Senate, Colorado General Assembly meets January to May every year, and
Ah,
so yeah, as soon as the election's over, we will start submitting legislation and getting ready for the next session. And as always, I run several energy and environmental bills, and planning to do that again in 2023.
awesome. Well, I definitely want to take some time through the episode to talk about that, because there's a lot of exciting stuff happening, and I mean, I remember talking to you from before, and I'm sure now it's just like there's so much happening, right? And so there's a lot of exciting things happening on the energy front, policy legislation. You got the midterm elections coming up, and so all exciting stuff, which we'll dive into. But before we keep going, I do want to remind all the listeners that I'm currently opening up sponsorship opportunities for the podcast. So if any energy focused companies are looking to increase their brand marketing initiatives, visibility, or awareness around your company's initiatives through the podcast, reach out to me and I'd love to work with you and discuss some options. So Chris, let's back up a little bit before we dive deep into the weeds here. Are you originally from Colorado, or where are you from? Uh-oh.
Yeah, I grew up in a little bit of lag there. Sorry, but yeah, I
Yeah.
grew up a little farm town in western Kansas called Goodland.
Ah,
Yeah, my dad was a high school teacher there. My mom was a nurse at the hospital, and really wonderful place to grow up. It's about 10 miles from the Colorado border, and
okay.
we were in in Mountain Time and all the Denver TV stations. So I always kind of felt almost more part of Colorado than I did Kansas when I was in high school. And but then went to K State and did engineering after that. So was in Manhattan. And for everybody listening who's from Oklahoma, really sorry about what we did in Norman last week. That was pretty fantastic. I was texting everybody I'd ever met from Oklahoma after
Yeah.
that win.
Yeah,
But
that's a big one for you guys.
yeah, yeah, and you can probably imagine how K Staters feel about UT Austin and OU at this point. Like, don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Right.
Go enjoy the SEC.
Oh my
But
goodness. I like how you threw that in there,
yeah,
Chris. That's good.
yeah, little jab, little jab.
Yeah. Oh, that's hilarious. So well speaking of football then, are you a big Broncos fan or?
Yeah, I love watching the Broncos. I suppose I feel a little more connected, just because of undergrad to the K State team, and I think I like college football just a bit better than pro football. But yeah, Denver's all Broncos all the time.
Yeah, no kidding. It's when I lived there, it was hard to, I mean, because I lived downtown, and so it was just you were constantly immersed in the Broncos spirit. And so hopefully Russell Wilson can get back on his horse. No pun intended there, but hopefully, because I know it's been a slow start for him from what I understand. I haven't followed it too closely, but I mean, I was in Denver twice in the last month. We do quite a bit of work up there. And so, but anyway, no, that's interesting. I always like to give a little bit of context. And so, Chris, explain, you've been in energy for a long time, looking through LinkedIn, you were with IHS and you held some really interesting positions, but was energy always of interest for you as a child growing up, or is it something that over time you just became interested in?
Yeah, I think for me it probably started in high school. I was really active on the high school debate team and doing extemp competitions, that kind of thing. And a bunch of the topics that we had were energy related. So I think that kind of got me started. And then I did nuclear engineering in undergrad and did engineering at the graduate level, master's, and then eventually did a PhD in energy economics. And it
Oh, wow.
it was really just a topic I fell in love with. I think for me it was really seeing the incredible transformative power of villages, of uh, places around the world that don't have access to modern energy sources. How much of a difference it makes if we can make that happen across the globe, and lifting people out of poverty because they have access to modern energy and electricity in particular. And so that really became a focus of my graduate work. I did projects in South Africa, did projects in China and India,
Wow.
really all with that common theme of how can we create an energy system that serves the globe, everyone, better, and to do it more efficiently and with as low emissions as possible. And so that's kind of been the common thread through my work, both academically and then at IHS, where I spent 10 years in the energy group there. And then eventually my work in the state legislature in Colorado, all kind of carry that theme.
Okay. No, that actually is very fascinating, Chris. And oftentimes when talking about energy poverty, because that's something that I don't think a lot of folks here in the US necessarily consider. Now, there's even folks here, obviously within the US, who don't have access to electricity. But for the most part, generally speaking, we could say that most Americans here have access to electricity and energy. And then oftentimes there's an argument from people that sort of have a certain position that say, well, a lot of times in these remote areas and places like Africa and India and just certain parts of the world that don't still have access to an abundant amount of energy, it's like, they're more concerned about having access to, let's just, for fossil fuels, it's like they just want to get the cheapest, most reliable form of energy. And so like a lot of times fossil fuels is the answer because that's how we built ours, through time, in the industrial revolution and whatever. It was like everything's built on the backbone. So on a very macro perspective, if someone says, well, yeah, that's great and all, but like for remote places, they deserve access to energy. And if that means oil and gas or coal or whatever, like that should be okay. What's like, if you're talking to someone who may not be educated deeply in sort of the world of sort of energy markets in general, what's sort of your stance on that? Because a lot of people are very pro, say, fossil fuels for a lot of parts of the world that still don't have the resources and ability to access technology like say we do here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, I guess I don't see it as an either or. I'll give an example
Yeah.
from my doctoral research was in a little village in the far western edge of India, near the Pakistan border, and in an area called the Rann of Kutch, and it's extremely remote. And it was,
Mm,
terrible roads and dirt tracks in some cases to get to some of the villages in that part of the country. And they were really reliant on diesel generators as sort of the only source of electricity for a village. And that
mm,
meant that they needed to truck in diesel from the big city, which was several hundred miles away over bad roads, and it was extremely expensive to do that. And so they were essentially paying 50, 60, 70 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity because they were so reliant on diesel gensets. And the project that I was working on was trying to look at how you could create hybrid systems by using wind and solar coupled with diesel gensets to
yeah.
have reliable electricity, but to drastically reduce the amount of diesel that you needed to buy. And so therefore decreasing the per kilowatt hour cost. And of course, those sorts of high electricity prices are pretty out of reach for most rural villagers, in the western edge of India. So
Mm,
I didn't see it really as an either or. I think we just take the very best technologies that we have and try to help folks, with those different types of solutions. And I guess the other thing I would say is there's sort of a leapfrog characteristic here too. That same area of India did not have landline telephones. They never got landline telephones, but
mm,
they immediately went to cell phones to be connected to the rest of the world. And so I think in
right.
energy, it's the same sort of thing. We don't have to repeat the same pattern, right, that the industrial world had in the 1950s, 60s, 70s in places that in some cases, right, in Africa or remote areas in the developing world, you can go straight to solar panels. You just create a microgrid with battery storage and solar panels, and you can provide light to that village at very low cost. So it's an example, I think, of not getting into an either or mentality, but just saying, hey, what's the best technology for the situation,
Right.
and how can we do it in the most efficient and environmentally sustainable way? And that's the kind of the leapfrog idea, similar to what we've seen with going straight to cell phones and skipping landlines essentially. And I think
Wow.
that's kind of what we need to do in the developing countries.
Wow. No, that's a fascinating take, Chris. And again, that firsthand experience and being able to talk on that, I think is where a lot of people don't, right? Because it's easy to sit here in the US and I like to say, like sideline quarterback everything and say this is what needs to be done. But for someone like yourself who's seen it and been there and has had your hands on it and witnessing it, I think is absolutely it's refreshing to hear that because again, it's and I always sort of make this reference. It's not a game of us or them. It's us and them, right? And it, kind of to supplement what you're saying there. And so, I think that's a just again, it's a refreshing stance, without being again so on one side or the other. It's what makes the most sense. For that part of the world. And so I'm really curious, Chris, have over the say the last few years, has there been any core beliefs you've changed your mind on over related to energy, whether it's regulation, policy? Does anything come to mind? Like, have you had a kind of an intrinsic shift or a more like conviction towards something?
Mm.
So say back that you have had since back then.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because the world has changed tremendously since I started this work essentially in the late '90s when I had my first job working in energy. And I think I don't know that I've had any big shifts other than I think my sense of urgency has increased around really trying to tackle the big environmental challenges that we face and how the energy system needs to evolve and transition to meet that challenge. And I think it was really the reason I left my job in 2015 and started campaigning for the state legislature, because I came to the conclusion that the best place to work on environmental issues, energy policy, was at state houses, at state government level. Until the IRA was passed a few weeks ago, there had been really no action in DC on these issues for a very long time, and I think the states have really led when it comes to this type of policy, or in this policy area. And so I don't know that I've had some big conversion, other than to say I think I've really tried to stay grounded in the fundamental economics of the choice set that we have in front of us. And in my academic and private sector career, did a lot of financial modeling, scenario analysis, and planning to look at what are the options on the table, and to be very clear-eyed and realistic, and to kind of think of like a supply curve of technology options. What do they cost, and at what quantity can they deliver? And a similar thing on the carbon side. What's the carbon abatement supply curve? What are the things that we can do where we actually pay ourselves to improve the environment? What are the things that are very low cost? I think about methane leaking from a coal mine. You can destroy that methane, flare that methane for like 50 cents a ton of reduced emissions. Very, very cheap. We should be doing all of that we can, and not concentrating on the super expensive carbon abatement options, for example. And the same thing on the supply side. Let's go and take advantage of the low cost options. I mean, right now, wind and solar coming in at sub $20 a megawatt hour. I studied nuclear power for many years. Nuclear power has got a lot of potential, but right now it's extremely expensive. And the plants that are being built in Georgia, Vogtle, are an example of that. And so let's just all be very clear-eyed about comparative economics and trying to make the best decisions we can, on the cost and performance of the different technologies. And I think that's what leads to the best outcome.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And so when you're talking about, say wind and solar, what's the response from, say, someone like yourself when someone's, when there's discussion around, well, yeah, it makes sense. However, like the amount to mine it, and if you look at the total life cycle analysis of something, as you're constantly mining these materials, there's a lot of cement involved, say for, infrastructure on the windmill, or sorry, the wind turbine, infrastructure for wind energy. Because that always seems like you've seen articles like, green is not that green. And so without getting again super into the weeds, but like what's a response, or what's some information that you could provide to help those, say, maybe look at it a little bit differently? Because the biggest thing is it's like, oh, it's not renewable. It's, because you're mining it, and then all the, the equipment and everything used to mining is not that great. What's sort of some silver lining around that topic?
Yeah, no, it's a really, really important one. I mean, there is no perfect answer, I guess, until we get the Mr. Fusion machine in our basement. There's every single form of energy has pluses and minuses. Every single technology has pluses and minuses. I guess what I would say is that I am seeing a really strong response right now on recycling and repurposing old equipment. Old solar panels where you can extract the metals and reuse them, grinding up the old wind turbine blades when they've reached end of life, and essentially turning them back into sand. I mean, that's they're fiberglass, so you just grind them up and you can landfill the sand. So there's lots of challenges there, but I tell you what, I would rather have those challenges than some of the strip mining in West Virginia, for example, right, where you're lopping off the top of mountains and causing, in some cases, long-term water pollution, right? So it's all, there's kind of a relativity to it. So as I said, every technology's got its pluses and minuses. I think what I'm hopeful about is that recycling and reuse of old climate tech, I think will keep pace with how that technology develops them. And so, the wind and solar that we're doing today, as it reaches its end of life 25, 30 years from now, I think we'll be able to recycle the vast majority of that material and then put it back into the next, advanced version of that technology. So not to say it's a totally recyclable or 100% circular, but it's certainly better for the planet than, a strip coal mine. So
Sure.
we just, let's just be clear-eyed about the trade-offs that we're making. And then, to the point about mining cobalt and magnesium and some of these metals that we need for solar panels and wind turbines, et cetera, and lithium-ion batteries for EVs. There's lots of problems. I mean, we've all seen the pictures from the Congo. So let's address those. Let's go after those. Let's improve the situation. But I would also say, have you seen oil production in Nigeria? I mean, it's pretty horrific. And so, let's just try to address those things as fast as we can.
Of course. No, and I think that the recycling piece is pretty interesting. I remember while doing a project for one of the courses we were doing at GEM, we interviewed a gentleman, I think he was out of Montreal, and he was doing a lot of really fascinating work that even doesn't make media, but on recycling the magnets from wind turbines that are needing replacement or that are at their end of their life cycle. And then two, I don't know who I was talking about, but there was someone that was representing sort of the bridge between, the US and Canadian energy. I think maybe it was a government organization, but essentially they were working together to figure out how to do a lot more stuff domestically. And by doing that, there was I think there were some subsidies, but at the end of the day, it was like, let's see if instead of like depending on China for all these rare earth elements, because there's a lot here, but what they were working towards being able to again do it more efficiently, hopefully a lot more sustainably, and doing it in a way that's a lot less impactful to just civilization within those areas that are doing a lot of mining for the rare earth elements, right? And so a lot of that stuff doesn't quite get talked about.
Yeah, I think I'm really excited though about some of the changes we put in, that we see in the IRA that was just passed, because I think, you talk about the supply chains for some of these rare earth metals, which turns out they're not that rare. They're that's the name they get in the periodic table. But I think we're going to onshore a lot more of that production, which I think will be better for the environment and makes our supply chains much more resilient. I mean, we're seeing the disruptions now where you have these long-term shutdowns in parts of China because of COVID or whatever it might be. And it causes massive disruption. And that's, one of the problems that has contributed to inflation right now. And so I think you get this double benefit from the IRA of better supply chains, better resiliency and reliability. And you create a lot of jobs in North America as a result. And I think we can safely say the mining regulations in North America are way better than they are basically everywhere else in the world. So, there's just a lot of benefit from improving those supply chains. And that was something I was glad to see, was part of the federal legislation.
Very cool. Yeah. So regarding the IRA, I mean, can you dive into something that maybe the IRA is sort of directly affecting you, or has allowed you to take something that you're involved with and extend it, or really, push it forward or accelerate the progress with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the IRA is going to open up a huge amount of opportunity across the clean tech space or climate tech space. And that's everything from hydrogen and additional tax incentives for CCS, additional tax incentives for wind, solar, batteries, EVs, right? There's a huge package, heat pumps, a bunch of climate tech that was included in that bill in a fairly agnostic way, right? Lots of different technologies, lots of different ideas that got benefit in IRA and now have to compete against each other. And I think that's what is going to be really drive dynamism and continue to provide great options for the economy and for consumers. And so that's, I think, the best part of the IRA is that it looks at really trying to lower the cost across a broad portfolio of decarbonization options, and then have those options really have to compete in the marketplace to see what's going to be most effective. I think the part that I was disappointed by is that there was nothing on the transmission side. And so we did a lot of things on supply, production tax credits, investment tax credits for wind and solar. That's great. But now we got to be able to deliver that energy and that electricity to market. And so I would have loved to have seen some help and some both on ITC type of instrument, as well as that's an investment tax credit, as well as siting streamlining for new power lines. Because for us to be successful, we need robust, interregional grids. And right now, the United States, unfortunately, is not there, and it's going to make it more expensive, more difficult to integrate lots of new energy resources that the IRA is going to be helping to support. So that to me was a big missing piece.
Interesting. And so why do you think, or why do you suspect that was a missing piece? Is it just because you can't do it all, or like why would have they not considered that?
Yeah, I wish I would have been in the room for some of those final discussions. I was not. I was in the state Senate, not the U.S. Senate. But so I guess I can't say with any certainty. I think it was. Transmission got a lot of attention in some of the early versions of Build Back Better and other versions of the bill that eventually got skinnied down to the IRA. And so it was there, it was on people's minds. I think, they had to make some reductions and changes through the negotiation. It was well covered in the papers. But, I think to me, that was the most important thing that was missing. And so I'm hoping the federal government can make progress on that, in future legislation, because I think for us to be successful with the other clean tech, we've got to have the connectors and the efficiency and reliability we get from better power grid.
Yeah, no, I think that brings up sort of another great topic to lead into is grid modernization, right? And you alluded to earlier is that's something that you're passionate about and that you're involved with. And so could you sort of describe, where we're at, what needs to happen, and where you see sort of things evolving, maybe on like a localized level in Colorado and perhaps expanding beyond that?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. This is an area where I've been spending a lot of time and attention on working not only in Colorado on legislation, but working with my colleagues around the Western U.S. For those folks that are less familiar, with the grid, we essentially have three interconnects in the United States. We've got the WEC, which is basically Colorado to the Pacific Ocean. We've got the Eastern Interconnect, which is everything else except 2/3 of Texas. And then you've got, Southern and Central Texas, which is ERCOT, the Electricity Reliability Council of Texas. ERCOT is a standalone island. There is basically no ability to move power back and forth between neighbors or even the panhandle of Texas, for that matter. It's a totally cut off. And the theory there for ERCOT was that they didn't want any FERC regulation. And so if you don't move any power across state lines, then there's no FERC regulation. The rest of the country has got, FERC reliability requirements and that type of thing, which frankly, I think are really beneficial for the system. It's not clear to me why, what part of, the Texas argument, makes sense at this point. And I think Texas paid a heavy price for it during Winter Storm Uri. Because they were not in a position to be able to bring in backup supplies and to keep the grid in a good position during extreme weather events. And you saw it again in California and Texas with the super hot days in August, where the grid was very stressed out. And both California and Texas, need more ability to bring in and share resources from their neighbors. In the Western United States and the WEC, the Western Electricity Coordinating Council. I've been pushing hard in Colorado and with my colleagues in other states to get the West into a regional transmission organization, or RTO. And I think that's really important because we start with 37 separate grids in the WEC. And folks who probably, California ISO, Independent System Operator, is the big one that services most of California. But then from there, you've got 37 more subgrids. And so there's a huge amount of inefficiency from all these different operators, and they all have to have reserves available, and they're not sharing resources as efficiently as they could if we had a full regional transmission organization. And so I passed a bill in the 21 session, Senate Bill 72 here in Colorado, that created a deadline for all of our operators to get into an RTO. I worked with a colleague, Senator Brooks in Nevada. He did the very same thing in that session in Nevada. And so now I think there's just a lot more momentum around this conversation to try to break down those barriers in the West. And I think for the consumers, it's going to be a huge benefit, because over time, these organized markets push the price of electricity down, because of course the cheapest source is what gets dispatched, and that is going to lower prices over time. And the other great thing is it allows us to interconnect lots of new energy technology, lots of new climate tech into the system: wind, solar, batteries, pumped hydro, you name it. You can now start bringing that online because the grid has been improved. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and my hope is that, as my dad would say, we got to skate to the puck, and the puck is moving, rapidly toward reducing emissions. And the single best way to do that in the West is to have a really modern, robust grid. And so that's why I really try to prioritize that in my legislative work.
Very cool. So for Colorado, and again, this is like sort of out of my arena, but when you pass these legislations or implement them, is it a long time for, say, like the vision that you have and the work that you put in to it to actually get executed? Like, can you kind of walk through like how that works? And then when, say, someone in Colorado who, say, voted for you, or someone who's part of that as well, like when they can actually, like when those get realized to where then the consumers can actually benefit from this type of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I would say some of it is very near term and some of it takes longer. I was just talking about the grid bill. Some of those aspects are already in motion. We created a transmission authority to work on new projects in the state. That is, been stood up and is actively looking at projects now. Other parts of it, like the 2030 deadline, right? There's a lot of work that has to be done to get there. And so it's going to take time for the benefits to be realized. Other pieces of legislation I've done, to, say, provide a tax credit for people installing a heat pump, you can take advantage of that right away. If you want to make the switch, you can take advantage of that. Things like tax credits for electric vehicle purchases. I worked on that bill a couple of years ago. That is immediately available to Colorado consumers. So I think it just depends on gotcha. what needs to be done in that area and how fast it can roll out. For tax incentives or for different decarbonization ideas, it can move very fast. For other things like these giant pieces of investment like the power grid, it takes time. And we just, the stuff, you kind of hear that phrase like, we need to plant trees even if we may never enjoy the shade, because our kids and our grandkids will. And so I try really hard to take that approach and attitude in my legislative work.
Yeah, no, that's such a very interesting sort of thought. Again, it's like, because a lot of people are so, generally speaking, are very much for immediate gratification, right? And it's like, well, we need to do something now because I want to be able to take advantage of it. But at the end of the day, I think most people would agree. It's like, we want to leave the world a better place for our kids and the next generations to come. And so, the planting the tree analogy there, I think, makes a lot of sense, especially with a lot of this stuff, because it takes time, right? I mean, we can't just, pull out all the transmission lines and replace them with smart grids and everything else. But it's, again, I think it's just, things take time. And folks like yourself are obviously putting in the work to make these things happen and put them in motion. With regards to grid modernization, are there any states that are kind of leading the way? And maybe it's Colorado, but would you say anyone is doing it right to where other states should kind of take note? Or does every state kind of have their sort of tug of war on what needs to be done versus what's happening and so on?
Yeah, it's I think a really interesting way to think about what's working and what's not in different states. I'm seeing some great progress in some places where new lines are getting done, including in Colorado. There's a new $1.7 billion proposal that's been working its way through final approvals that will drastically increase the reliability and capacity of our grid. there are other places where it's been stalled. I mean, Maine is a good example. There was a big transmission line that was proposed to bring hydropower from Quebec down into Massachusetts, and they needed a line through Maine to connect those sources to the load, and that line has been held up in a bunch of different political and regulatory processes and multiple lawsuits. And so, I don't know that there's one state that has really stood out. I am hoping that the legislation we did in Colorado is going to really allow Colorado to be a leader, along with states like Nevada and New Mexico and Utah, all pitching in together to figure this out, figure out this puzzle. It's really the nature of the grid. There's no one state that can do it by itself. Even California, which is the largest electricity load in the country, can't do it by itself. And it's finding out the hard way. It can't do it by itself. And I think, I think Texas is going to come to the same conclusion at some point. And there's just massive benefit from cooperation. The same reason global trade theory, is beneficial for everybody who trades, right? Both sides win. The same is true in electricity markets. And the more we share, the more we interconnect, the more we enhance each other's reliability, the better it's going to be for everybody. And so I think there's kind of an overwhelming economic logic to it. There's an overwhelming environmental logic to it. And I also think, people demand absolute reliability when it comes to electricity, right? We want 6 or 7 nines of reliability. And the only way we're going to get there is to have a very modern, interconnected grid. And so I feel confident, we're skating to that puck right now.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. And so, and I think this is something that we had talked about during my time as a student for you. And it was the idea of like a national, and you're kind of talking about it right now, I believe, but like say, like if you had full control, let's just say hypothetically speaking, to modernize the grid as you see fit, is there such thing as like a nationalized grid? And if so, could you speak on like what that might look like?
Yeah, I think ultimately in our lifetimes, Justin, we will have a continental grid. We already trade power with Mexico and Canada in large volumes. My guess is that we'll just have a North American grid. And there's a lot of ways to get there. I wouldn't prescribe right now one over the other, but I think, by mid-century, that's essentially what we're going to have is a continental grid. And there's some great new technologies on not only AC alternating current lines, but large direct current lines that can sort of be the arteries in the circulatory system. And there's some really great proposals right now. I was reading about one from Oklahoma to Colorado that's being looked at. There's a big DC line that's under development from Western Kansas to Indiana. And you put in a few of these things across the US, and you would largely create a continental grid just based on those DC lines that would knock down the basis differential between different parts of the country. Similar to, folks in oil and gas look at, what's the city gate price in Boston for natural gas, or what's the electricity price in Boston versus New York, the basis differential that develops. I think this is where the intercontinental grid, can very rapidly drive efficiency by going after big differentials. And I think you'll see AC and DC lines start to do that. And I think by mid-century, we'll essentially have a continental grid, because the billions in savings easily pay for those investments. And it's really just a governance question of like making sure you've got the right cost allocation. Are the beneficiaries paying for those lines? And if you've got organized markets around the country and interconnected grid, it's pretty easy to then allocate those costs. So that to me is what I'm really hopeful for, and where I think we're going to be by 2050.
Crazy. No, that's really interesting. So what would you say is the biggest limiter or challenge that we'll face to actually achieve something like that?
I think it's largely a political will. I think there's incumbents are always going to try to protect their position, right? And whatever market, right? Say it was, you're a large manufacturer of tiddlywinks, you're going to try to not have competition. I totally get that, right? Incumbents like to protect their margins. And so that is one of the problems we're up against, is that the current operators, in some cases, it is not to their advantage to have more competition. They might have assets that would be out of the money in a more competitive market. And so they are going to resist going into a market. I totally get that. But from a public policy standpoint, and as my job as a state senator representing my constituents who are electricity ratepayers, I feel like my job is to create a system that is as good for the ratepayer and as good for the economy as possible. I am not trying to protect, the shareholders of company X, right? That is not my job.
Right.
And so I'm really trying to focus on consumer surplus. If you go back to the Econ 101 term, like how do you create as much value for the consumer as possible? And there's no doubt that the most value for the consumer is an interconnected continental grid. But there's going to be folks who put hurdles in front of that because it's not in their financial best interest. So that's fine. We have lots of ways to compensate the losers, and using maybe some of the surplus that the winners are going to get. We help with that transition, right? There's a very normal sort of puts and takes that we have in policy and economic policy all the time. I mean, to give you an example, we have moved forward with closing down all of the remaining coal plants in Colorado. As part of that work, we've created mechanisms like securitization, which I passed in a bill in 2019, to make sure there are financial resources to help workers who lose their jobs at the coal plant, or to help the communities who lose property tax because the coal plant closed down. So we're trying really hard to make sure that there are mechanisms to support the transition. And I think the same could be true as you think about the transition of the grid. Is there's going to be some winners, there's going to be some losers. And let's figure out the negotiation to get it done, because every day we wait, we are literally lighting money on fire. We are wasting resources, and so there is savings that can be used to help smooth that transition. And I think that's what we started doing in my example on the coal transition, and I think we can do the same thing in other parts of the energy system.
Yeah. Wow. No. Again, it's to consider, like you say, because and a lot of times when these changes are happening, there's a lot of emphasis on, oh, well, what about me and what's going to happen to me? But like you said, there's a lot of mechanisms in place that really consider like the trade-off of like, okay, we understand that you may lose out on X, but we're going to do some things to help offset that. And so that's really interesting, because again, like as myself, as someone who's kind of, I consider myself somewhat general public, you don't often hear that. And so I think, spreading that message is certainly important, especially when these initiatives are put in place or discussed or proposed, because it's just like, you're trying to help for the greater good, but ultimately there's going to be people who on the backside, I want to say suffer, but maybe they do. And so it's cool to hear that they're at least that's being considered and taken care of, hopefully. We're coming up close to the hour here. And so I want to kind of wrap things up. And I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. So we may have to, after the midterm elections, the dust settles here, we may have to do a round two and kind of hear what's going to happen into 2023. But I'm curious, Chris, with your passion and the love for what you do, is there a level that you're looking to get to within politics to maybe even make a greater difference for the country, even perhaps? Or what's that look like?
Well, very kind of you to ask the question. I appreciate it. I guess I've tried to take the attitude of being 100% in on the job that I've been hired to do, in this case state senator, and serve on the budget committee and chair appropriations. So do a lot of budget and tax work as well, in concert with the energy policy work we've been talking about. And I guess that's been in the papers in Denver several times in the last few months. I am looking at jumping into the Denver mayor's race.
Okay.
And so kind of doing my final due diligence on that as a possibility. And that election is next April. So I'm going to make a decision here pretty quick, but that's one opportunity that I've been considering as a possible next step.
Okay, so I have to ask, do you have a slogan? Because I feel like a slogan is awesome for your brand, like Hansen for mayor. I mean, you got to come up with something, Chris.
I promise you, I am thinking about some different ideas on that front. And Yeah, to be confirmed soon. What the final version is gonna be.
Very cool. Well, I can't wait to see that come all unfold, and best of luck with everything that you're doing. And I commend you and appreciate. I mean, I'm obviously not a resident of Colorado, although I have a lot of friends, really close friends. I travel all the time. Colorado is a beautiful place, and you're obviously making a huge difference. So, on behalf of Colorado and the rest of the country, we thank you for that. And for all the listeners out there, again, as a reminder, please reach out if you'd like to sponsor the show. Would really appreciate it. And Chris, what's the best way for people to get to know more about your initiatives, perhaps what you're doing, midterm elections? Is there any sort of resources that you'd like to share that people can join? And if so, I'll put the links in the show notes, but feel free to speak on those if you'd like.
Yeah, just folks want to learn a little bit more about what we're up to in Colorado. I guess I would suggest I've got my own website for my Senate office, and
Yeah.
I've posted a lot of information there. It's hansenforcolorado.com. And if folks want to look up particular bills that we've talked about today, if they want to look at some of the stuff that I've worked on over the last few years, that's very easy to find at ledge.colorado.gov, and you can look at all the bills if you want, but search on keywords or look up the ones that I've sponsored. That's another place to kind of get some detail on some of the changes and statutes that we've done in Colorado and how that affects the energy market. And so that's another easy way for your listeners to take a closer look.
Perfect. Well, you heard it here, folks. And please, if you could, even subscribe to or go follow Chris or connect with Chris on LinkedIn, because I know you're active on there oftentimes. And thanks for everyone for listening. And until next time, always remember that everyone deserves access to energy, and we is greater than me. Thanks, everybody.